Hollywood has long relied on the illusion that every explosion is rehearsed, every burst of flame carefully measured, and every dangerous moment fully under control. But the truth, woven through the industry's history, tells a different story, one where fire repeatedly slipped past safety lines and transformed scripted spectacle into real crisis. For decades, filmmakers pushed the limits of practical effects, convinced they could shape heat and flame as reliably as any other tool of the trade. Yet, fire, indifferent to planning, often answered with its own agenda. There were nights when flames climbed higher than expected, when embers drifted beyond the designated burn zones, and when a controlled detonation unleashed a chain reaction no one foresaw. Sets constructed at enormous cost collapsed into charred wreckage. Stunt teams found themselves navigating smoke not meant to exist, and in the aftermath of each incident, studios moved swiftly, rewriting reports, sealing off details, and ensuring the public never glimpsed how close their productions had come to catastrophe. Many of the action films celebrated today for their explosive energy were forged in conditions far more dangerous than audiences ever realized. Behind their seamless sequences lie stories of crews fleeing burning structures, of equipment left melted and twisted, of entire sound stages scorched black before dawn. These moments rarely reach the headlines, buried instead beneath Hollywood's polished veneer. Tonight, we return to those forgotten fires, the 15 action movies that nearly saw their sets consumed by real flames. Each one stands as a reminder that danger doesn't vanish when the camera stops rolling, and that even the most controlled environments can ignite into chaos. Once you know what happened behind the curtain, the fire-filled scenes you thought were fiction may never look the same again. Fact 1. The Dark Knight. When miniature Gotham became a firestorm, the miniature skyline built for the Dark Knight was one of the most intricate practical environments ever constructed for a modern action film. Dozens of handcrafted buildings, wiring channels, structural supports, and breakaway elements were engineered to collapse with flawless precision once the explosive sequence began. In theory, every detonation had been calculated to a science, but when the ignition cue was triggered, the resulting eruption spiraled far beyond anything the effects team had modeled. A volatile combination of adhesives, paint compounds, and heat-reactive materials ignited simultaneously, creating a surge of flame that tore upward in a violent column. Crew members stationed behind protective shields felt the air contract from the abrupt blast of heat. Smoke engulfed control monitors, and burning fragments rained across the stage like fiery confetti. Technicians rushed to shut down power feeds as firefighters charged in, trying to contain the escalating blaze before it reached stored effects material nearby. Official documents later recorded the incident under a vague label, thermal deviation, a phrase crafted to minimize the severity of what had occurred, but those on set recalled the visceral fear of watching a carefully constructed environment lose all predictability in an instant. The miniature city, once a marvel of design, was left charred and twisted beyond repair, and yet, the footage captured in those few chaotic seconds was so striking, so startlingly real, that it earned its place in the final cut. The scene remains iconic, but the truth behind its creation reveals how easily cinematic ambition can collide with forces far harsher than any script anticipates. Fact 2. Die Hard, the ceiling that turned into a hidden inferno. Inside the vast soundstage where Die Hard's Nakatomi Plaza interiors were constructed, the illusion of a high-rise under siege depended on precise pyrotechnic choreography. Blank rounds, wall charges, shattering glass, and debris cannons were wired throughout the set to create the relentless assault that would define the film's action. But with each controlled blast, heat traveled upward into the rafters, into layers of insulation that had aged far beyond their recommended lifespan. During one intense corridor sequence, a larger-than-expected heat wave surged into the ceiling grid and ignited the brittle material resting above the false tiles. Flames rippled across the rafters before anyone realized what was happening. Sparks and smoking fragments began falling like burning hail onto the set below, sending crew members scrambling for cover while Bruce Willis was pulled off the floor mid-take. Fire crews stationed nearby rushed in as the fire expanded, threatening to reach a cluster of compressed air canisters used for debris shots. A partial collapse of the ceiling forced production into an immediate halt. Fox executives quickly issued internal directives to control information flow, insisting the incident be described only as a localized ignition. But for those present, the event was anything but minor. It was a moment when the line between cinematic illusion and genuine danger vanished in a surge of heat from overhead. An unplanned reminder that even the safest seeming sets can harbor unseen fire, waiting for the smallest spark. Fact 3. Mission Impossible 2. When wind turned a stunt into a wildfire, the outdoor fire run in Mission Impossible 2 was intended to showcase a dramatic surge of flames rising behind Tom Cruise as he sprinted across rugged terrain. Effects technicians had spent days mapping out gel patterns, adjusting ignition points, and testing wind direction to ensure the fire would remain controlled. But weather in the Australian hillsides proved more volatile than their instruments suggested. As dusk approached, shifting winds funneled oxygen straight toward the ignition arc. When the sequence began, the flames exploded upward with sudden intensity, leaping past their intended boundary and igniting pockets of dry brush that had blended innocently into the landscape. Embers lifted into the wind and scattered across the hill, sparking multiple fires that stretched beyond the crew's containment lines. Shouts rang out as stunt teams and technicians abandoned positions to drag equipment out of the blaze's advancing path. Smoke thickened quickly, disorienting crew members who had seconds to retreat. Firefighters were summoned urgently as flames began crawling toward a nearby wooded area, threatening to trigger a full environmental emergency. Several individuals suffered heat, stress, and production was shut down while authorities assessed whether filming conditions remained safe. The official studio summary softened everything, marking the incident as an environmental anomaly. But eyewitnesses remembered standing in stunned silence afterward, watching the hillside glow with the aftermath of a fire that had nearly become a regional disaster. The stunning visuals captured that evening survived in the film, but the chaos and fear that shaped them were left buried behind studio silence. Fact 4. The Expendables 3. When a rehearsal spark ignited a real detonation. In The Expendables 3, the production transformed an old Bulgarian warehouse into a sprawling prop armory filled with wooden crates, replica munitions, racks of assault rifles, and rows of pyrotechnics wired for a high-intensity battle sequence. The space looked convincing on camera, but behind the scenes it was a powder keg. Over days of rehearsals, residue from blank rounds and debris from repeated tests accumulated in corners and beneath prop shelving. During what should have been a straightforward effects trial, a misfired squib released a spark that drifted farther than anyone anticipated. It landed on a patch of powder dust, mixed with deteriorated prop materials, an unstable combination that ignited instantly. The resulting blast tore through the room with startling force, triggering nearby charges and vaulting flames upward. Lighting rigs toppled as heat surged across the warehouse, and technicians scrambled for cover behind crates that now burned like kindling. The inferno spread rapidly, feeding on old timber beams and abandoned equipment. A section of the warehouse roof buckled and collapsed, sending metal and ash raining onto the floor below. Fire crews battled the blaze for nearly an hour before containing it, and several crew members were treated for burns and smoke exposure. Lionsgate issued a tightly controlled statement describing the event as a contained pyrotechnic spike, but those present remembered it far differently. They recalled the deafening roar, the blinding heat, and the sudden awareness that they were standing inside a set that had become a real explosion. Production halted while the wreckage was cleared, and structural assessments were made. Though the final film showcases seamless action, the crew carried with them the memory of the day. A rehearsal nearly became a catastrophe. Fact 5. Backdraft. When the film about fire lost control of its own flames, Backdraft set out to portray fire not as a background element, but as a living, breathing force, an unpredictable presence, shaping every scene. To achieve this, the filmmakers relied on practical flames, guided through channels built inside elaborate sets. Oxygen vents, accelerant strips, and flame bars were arranged to behave like a creature inhaling and exhaling on cue. But during an intense corridor sequence, the illusion collapsed. A door opened at precisely the wrong moment, causing a surge of oxygen to rush into the enclosed environment. The fire responded instantly. A roaring backdraft shot upward, curling along the ceiling and sweeping down the walls with terrifying speed. props meant to char cosmetically erupted into full flames. Crew members dropped to the ground, shielding their faces from the sudden blast of heat. With the sprinkler system disabled to preserve visual continuity, the only line of defense was the on-set firefighters, who rushed in with extinguishers, shouting directions through thick smoke. Portions of the set were consumed so quickly that rebuilding became unavoidable, delaying production for days. Universal Studios later framed the incident as a moment of unexpected flame behavior, but to those who had been there, it was a reminder that the film's central theme, fire's refusal to obey, was more literal than anyone intended. The movie's final visuals are stunning, but they were born from a night when the production's carefully choreographed inferno became frighteningly real. Fact 6. Terminator Salvation. When sparks awoke the ghosts of an industrial past to depict a scorched, post-apocalyptic world. Terminator Salvation, filmed in abandoned industrial complexes, still coated with remnants of their hazardous past, chemical dust, aging grease, and deteriorating materials that clung to catwalks and machinery. The setting provided an authentic, ruinous texture, but it also hid dangers no effects plan fully accounted for. During a large-scale battle sequence, synchronized explosions were armed across a fractured landscape of concrete and rusted steel. A premature detonation sent sparks skittering across the ruins, slipping into a cavity filled with decades-old industrial residue. The ignition was instantaneous and violent. Flames burst upward, curling around rusted beams and racing toward piles of foam props waiting for the next setup. Smoke thickened until it swallowed the set, obscuring exits and disorienting crew members as they rushed to evacuate equipment. Fire crews struggled to navigate unstable structures. Wary of collapsing platforms softened by the heat, several technicians were treated for smoke inhalation, and production entered an immediate freeze while investigators assessed the site's safety. The studio later referred to the event as an effects irregularity, but eyewitnesses spoke of a moment when the past and future collided, when remnants of forgotten industrial work ignited under the pressure of cinematic destruction. The fire was extinguished, but the memory of how quickly the ruins came alive with flame lingered for the rest of the shoot. Fact 7. The Crow. When a sudden blaze became the first omen, before The Crow became irrevocably tied to tragedy, the production endured a fire that cast an unsettling shadow over the shoot. The incident unfolded during a night sequence on a meticulously crafted street set, designed to mimic a decayed industrial district washed in rain and neon glow. Flame pots were positioned along rooftops to create the brooding ambiance that defined the film's signature look. For most of the night, the fire effects behaved predictably. Then a gust of wind swept through the alley, scattering a burst of sparks downward. They landed on a neglected pile of tar paper, sawdust, and insulation scraps materials that had been pushed aside during a rapid set reset. Earlier that evening, within seconds, the debris ignited. Flames crawled up the backside of the facades, illuminating the set with a harsh, flickering light that replaced artistic design with raw danger. Crew members shouted warnings as smoke rolled through the narrow space, distorting the shadows and forcing camera operators to abandon their posts. Firefighters on standby rushed in, attacking the flames as they spread behind the structures, warping wooden beams and melting carefully painted textures. Though the blaze was eventually contained, it destroyed a portion of the street set and introduced a palpable unease among the crew. Many later described the fire as a bad sign, an omen that the production had crossed an unseen threshold. In the weeks that followed, the memory of the flames lingered in quiet conversations, taking on a mythic quality after the far greater tragedy that would soon overshadow the film. On screen, the world of The Crow feels haunted. Behind the scenes, the fire that erupted that night was the first haunting. Fact 8. Blade Runner. When a neon dream nearly collapsed in flames, the dystopian alleyways of Blade Runner were built inside an aging soundstage whose structural fatigue was masked beneath layers of neon tubing, steam machines, and atmospheric grime. To bring the world to life, technicians lined the rooftops of the alley, set with flame bars meant to cast a pulsating glow along the dripping walls and cluttered pathways. Late into a night shoot, one flame bar malfunctioned, releasing an unusually long and forceful burst. The flame licked upward into the rafters, where old insulation, dry, brittle, and shedding fibers after decades of neglect, caught fire instantly. Burning fragments drifted down like glowing embers shed from some malfunctioning cyberpunk furnace. They landed on chemically treated floor wetdowns, igniting small patches that flickered unpredictably between the shadows. Crew members scrambled to extinguish the scattered fires while smoke thickened, bending the neon light into surreal streaks that distorted visibility. Fire crews tore through parts of the set to reach hidden pockets of flame smoldering in the rafters and behind decorative facades. Production halted as engineers evaluated whether the soundstage remained structurally reliable. The studio publicly labeled the incident a minor ignition, but eyewitness reports told a different story. A moment when the futuristic world crafted for the camera nearly vanished into real fire. Ironically, the footage surrounding the event later became some of the film's most iconic imagery, its cinematic beauty forged from a night when disaster came far too close. Fact 9. Spider-Man 2002. When an entire backlot became a raging fire line, Sony's New York Street backlot, a staple of countless productions, was transformed into a vibrant urban environment for Spider-Man 2002. The facades were freshly painted, awnings rehung, signage restored, every detail engineered to withstand stunts and controlled fire effects. But during preparations for a nighttime explosion, a test detonation sent a lone spark drifting farther than its designed radius. It settled on a cloth awning suspended above a storefront, and the material ignited with startling speed. The fire climbed the facades, leaping from awning to awning like a chain reaction fueled by dry timber and decades of accumulated set dressing. A sudden wind funneled the blaze down the narrow street, turning the beloved backlot into a corridor of uncontrolled fire. Crew members attempted to smother the advancing flames, but the blaze grew too rapidly. Firefighters arrived to find entire facades consumed, the heat warping metal fixtures and blowing out windows. Hours later, when the flames were finally subdued, much of New York Street lay in smoldering ruin. The loss forced an expensive reconstruction and delayed filming significantly. Official studio statements framed the inferno as an equipment malfunction, but internal assessments pointed to deeper issues: aging materials, ambitious pyrotechnic plans, and a chain of overlooked vulnerabilities. To those who witnessed the devastation, the fire became a stark reminder of how fragile even Hollywood's most dependable backlot really is. Fact 10. The Matrix Reloaded. When the freeway set became a corridor of heat, the monumental freeway, built for The Matrix Reloaded, was one of the most ambitious practical structures ever constructed for an action sequence. A looping, 3-mile stretch of asphalt engineered to collapse, erupt, and withstand repeated vehicular destruction. Beneath its surface lay a network of flame tubes, remote detonators, debris cannons, and explosive pods designed to simulate chaos in perfect synchronization. But during a complex multi-vehicle collision, the system faltered. One stunt car erupted into a fireball that burned far hotter and longer than predicted. The asphalt softened under the prolonged heat, causing embedded flame tubes to rupture. Suddenly, uncontrolled jets of fire burst upward from cracks in the roadway. Rubber from earlier wrecks ignited instantly, creating streaks of flame spiraling along the guardrails. Stunt drivers swerved out of danger while smoke rolled across the freeway, swallowing visibility. Crew members sprinted across the tarmac, hauling extinguishers and shouting warnings as more flame vents burst open. Firefighters cut into the guardrails to reach hotspots that continued to flare. By the time the blaze was contained, sections of the freeway had buckled into warped, unusable terrain. Engineers spent hours assessing structural integrity before approving further filming. The studio's official explanation, a heat irregularity, barely acknowledged the reality. Their multi-million-dollar set had briefly transformed into an uncontrolled furnace. Though the resulting chase remains one of cinema's most celebrated practical sequences, few viewers realize how close the production came to losing the very structure that made it possible. Fact 11. Inglourious Basterds. When a fictional inferno almost became a real tragedy, the brutal final act of Inglourious Basterds required the complete destruction of a cinema set built with layers of ornate paneling, velvet drapes, and elevated balconies, all of which were engineered to burn in a controlled manner. Tarantino, insistent on authenticity, pushed for flames with enough intensity to evoke genuine panic on screen. Flame bars and accelerant patches were meticulously placed along the theater interior, with firefighters standing by. But when the cue was given, the flames surged faster than anticipated. Velvet curtains meant to burn slowly ignited in explosive bursts. Heat accumulated rapidly, warping metal fixtures and sending burning fragments spiraling into the balcony area. Smoke thickened, choking the upper levels and forcing actors and stunt performers to evacuate. Crew members struggled to reach suppression equipment as the fire pressed into hidden compartments behind the set's decorative walls. Firefighters fought to contain the blaze before it breached structural supports. Production halted as the damaged sections were torn apart for safety inspections. The studio publicly softened the incident as an intensified burn, but the crew recalled a frantic scramble to escape a set that felt moments away from total collapse. The terrifying realism captured in the film was born from a night when fiction and danger nearly fused into one. Fact 12. The Rundown. When a jungle set transformed into a spreading wildfire, the lush Hawaiian jungle used in The Rundown offered a vivid backdrop for explosive stunts, but it also introduced risks far more volatile than the production anticipated. During a nighttime ambush sequence, pyrotechnic teams set charges along a narrow corridor of trees and undergrowth. The explosion unleashed a wave of heat that immediately ignited dried vegetation just beyond the cleared shooting zone. Embers lifted into the humid air and drifted among treetops, sparking additional fires on both sides of the set. Within moments, the controlled pyrotechnics gave way to a growing wildfire. Crew members yelled warnings as flames expanded unpredictably, forcing the immediate evacuation of cameras, lighting rigs, and generators. Smoke thickened, disorienting operators attempting to salvage equipment. Local firefighters rushed in, battling the advancing blaze through steep, tangled terrain. Concerns grew that the fire might spread toward nearby residential areas, prompting emergency notifications. Environmental authorities were later called to assess the damage and evaluate whether pyrotechnic regulations had been breached. The studio's public statement labeled the event a brush ignition, but those present experienced something far more alarming: a jungle answering the film's explosion with one of its own. Though the captured footage appears seamless on screen, the memory of that wildfire lingered for everyone who witnessed how swiftly nature pushed back against Hollywood's ambitions. Fact 13. Rambo 3. When the desert ignited like a battlefield for real, the sweeping desert used for Rambo 3 provided the ideal canvas for large-scale explosions meant to evoke the chaos of war. Effects crews planted high-powered charges across a valley filled with brittle shrubs and sun-scorched brush. The sequence was designed to unfold in cascading eruptions as stunt performers and armored vehicles crossed the terrain. But when the detonations were triggered, the explosions generated a heat wave so intense that surrounding vegetation ignited instantly. What began as a planned burst of cinematic destruction quickly became an uncontrolled desert fire. Winds whipped across the dunes, fanning the flames toward a cluster of production vehicles loaded with fuel, lighting rigs, and delicate sound equipment. Crew members sprinted through the rising smoke, dragging cables and pushing carts of gear uphill to escape the blaze's encroaching edge. A generator trailer briefly caught fire before being extinguished, sending a column of black smoke spiraling into the sky. Even firefighters struggled against the shifting winds, which pushed the fire in unpredictable arcs across the valley. The incident forced production to halt, while containment teams worked to control hotspots that continued burning beneath sand and rock. Though the studio later described the event as a manageable brush complication, the crew who stood on that scorched earth remembered a far more perilous scene. The film's explosive desert warfare remains visually striking, but behind those moments lies the memory of a fire that very nearly transformed the set into a real battleground. Fact 14. The Rock. When Alcatraz's forgotten dust became fuel, shooting The Rock on Alcatraz Island lent an authenticity impossible to replicate on a soundstage. But the historic prison's aging infrastructure, rotting beams, chemical residues, and decades of accumulated dust created a combustible environment that no one fully accounted for. In a decommissioned warehouse repurposed for an explosive action sequence, pyrotechnic engineers positioned accelerant lines along the floor to produce a rolling fireball. At ignition, however, the explosion erupted with unexpected vertical force. Flames shot upward into the rafters, igniting layers of dust and decayed material hidden in the ceiling's crevices. Fiery fragments drifted down like molten debris. Crew members shouted warnings as smoke thickened, obscuring exits and forcing equipment operators to abandon their posts. Parts of the wooden ceiling smoldered and cracked before collapsing in bursts of flaming debris. With limited water supply on the island and restricted access routes, Fire crews struggled to contain the blaze before it spread to adjacent historical structures. The aftermath left charred beams, scorched walls, and melted props, prompting an urgent structural review. Public statements minimized the danger, describing it as a contained disturbance. But eyewitnesses remembered a moment when the old prison seemed to awaken with violent energy. The final film showcases the sequence without hint of the chaos behind it, yet the memory of that warehouse burning remains one of the production's most sobering stories. Fact 15. Quantum of Solace. When a racetrack became a tunnel of flame, for Quantum of Solace, the production constructed a temporary racetrack in Italy to stage a high-speed chase, involving collapsing barriers and explosive impacts. Effects teams embedded charges beneath foam structures and along reinforced track edges. During a test detonation, one charge misfired, releasing a spray of sparks that drifted farther than anticipated. The sparks landed on synthetic sound-dampening materials, lining the track materials that burned intensely once ignited. Flames spread rapidly along the panels, melting adhesives and insulation into molten streams that dripped across the pavement. Lighting rigs and camera platforms stood directly in the fire's path, forcing operators to flee as black smoke rolled upward. Firefighters battled the blaze for hours, extinguishing hotspots that continued to flare due to the melting, highly flammable compounds. Large sections of the set were reduced to warped metal and charred rubble, triggering delays and a reassessment of pyrotechnic protocols. Official accounts described the event as a minor setback, but internal reports revealed the razor-thin margin between the incident and total equipment loss, including high-value cameras and precision stunt vehicles. On screen, the chase unfolds with seamless momentum. Behind the scenes, the racetrack's brief transformation into a tunnel of fire remains one of the production's most closely guarded memories. Bonus fact: the lost action film that vanished in its own flames. In the late 70s, a small independent studio, eager to break into the action market, attempted a bold production inside an abandoned warehouse they could afford but barely retrofit. The building's crumbling interior, lined with untreated timber, rusted pipes, and decades of industrial residue, became both their set and their undoing. The film's climactic sequence called for a series of modest pyrotechnic bursts meant to illuminate the maze of makeshift corridors built from reclaimed scrap. But during a late-night rehearsal, a faulty detonator sparked against a pile of aged prop materials coated in layers of dust and chemical fragments. The resulting ignition spread with terrifying speed. Flames raced along wooden walkways, leapt between precariously stacked platforms, and climbed support beams weakened by time. Crew members asleep in portable trailers were jolted awake by the roar of the fire, escaping through broken windows as pockets of the warehouse collapsed behind them. By the time firefighters subdued the inferno, the entire structure had caved inward, burying cameras, costumes, scripts, and every frame of exposed film. Insurance investigators ruled the incident preventable, citing inadequate safety protocols and hazardous storage practices. The studio, already unstable financially, folded within months. With no surviving footage, no complete script, and no preserved production materials, the movie slipped quietly into obscurity. Its title never reached public record. Today, the project survives only in fragments of conversation among aging crew members, spoken with lowered voices, as if the fire had scorched not just the set, but the memory of what the film might have become. Fire may be captured for spectacle, shaped for drama, and edited into something beautiful, but the stories behind these films reveal how fragile that illusion truly is. What burned in the shadows was never meant for audiences to see, yet it shaped the movies we remember today. If these hidden histories have stirred your curiosity, there are many more buried beneath Hollywood's polished surface. Stay with us and step deeper behind the velvet curtain, where the truths the studios hid still smolder, waiting for someone willing to look closely enough to see the sparks.